Well, welcome everybody again to Inchigeela, and today we've got my friend Tom Carlson, and Tom is very involved. He is involved with the Carrignacurra restoration project, but he is going to be my interviewer. So he's turning the table on me today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Joe. I always enjoy your company. I would like to ask you about your background. How did you end up running this hotel and pub?
Well, I suppose I'm the fourth generation of the family who's here. My grandfather bought the building in about 1941. He was retiring from his other business projects in the village. As a young man, he was in Butte, Montana as a copper miner, and he brought a lot of business ideas back with him. So he started the hotel, and my parents continued with that plan, and they had 14 kids to educate and raise. So the hotel became pretty busy in the late 50s, right through the 60s and into the 70s. So when I was about 8 or 10, I was wandering around in here, and I suppose I've been 50 years wandering around these rooms and working here ever since.
So you grew up in this village, obviously.
I grew up, very, very happy childhood memories of growing up in the village.
What have you seen? What was it like when you were a child, your earliest recollections?
I think my lifespan is quite amazing when you think that the year I was born, in 1955, that the electricity came for the first time to the village. So that was a huge change, and growing up in the village, we still had the markets, the hucksters, the fowl buyers and so on a weekly market, and you had maybe 120 suppliers coming into the village every day with horses and carts and tractors and trailers to supply milk to our creamery in the village.
So not only was this a hub for the dairy industry, but you're saying that people would bring products here to sell rather than the people here going to, for example, now they go to Macroom or they go to Cork, but people more generally would bring products here?
Right. My grandmother's family, who were here before my grandfather, were butter merchants, so it was a big trading post with the 3 big fairs and the weekly markets. So, and as I said, 14 shops in the village. So all of these people sold different things and manufactured different things. Tailors, blacksmiths, harness makers, carpenters, and the grocery stores, butter dealers and so on.
Now, I read at one point this village or its area had 6,000 residents, but today it's down to 130, I think. So how did that happen?
Well, we look at ourselves as a parish, and our parish population in the before the famine was 6,000, and I think after the famine, the numbers of immigration and some famine deaths, the population dropped down to about 2,000, and it's about that today.
Oh, in the whole parish?
Yeah.
So the village has 130?
And it may be 230 or 250 or maybe 300, but we look at ourselves as a parish, which is really a church division, and the community is, the River Lee cuts it into council areas, so we're in the Macroom municipal region, and if you go on the south side of the river, you're in the Demanway and West Cork region.
So it turned into a tourist area where people come to fish for salmon, I understand, and then that all was stopped.
Yes, it's an area of great beauty. There's 6 miles of lake, beautiful mountains around, and of course Gugan Barra would be one of the top 10 attractions of the county. So there was always people coming to Gugan Barra on pilgrimage, and early tourists would have come there. And in my young days, and like Inchigeela had 2 hotels, which was unusual, but it had coach traffic and it had salmon fishing in the River Lee at that stage, but the hydro dam stopped that. But in the late 50s, there was a group called the Legion of Mary, and they used to established, they wanted to support businesses in rural Ireland, so they established a holiday centre here called the Inchkeela Catholic Holidays Association. And it sounds a bit corny, but at that time they filled the village with 70 or 80 people, and when I was a little lad of 5 or 6 years of age, the village would be buzzing with people from all over the world. And they were very well connected, so the village hall would have all sorts of entertainment for these visitors.
Now this structure started out as a smaller building.
It would have, yeah.
And was added on to over the years. But what do you think the original structure has seen in its time? The War of Independence
this was
a quite
crucial
point.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I suppose if you were to go back to the very foundation of the little business here, you had probably a single story thatched in, and in the late 19th century there was a proper hotel built on the site, and then you had all of what happened during the War of Independence, and I think you're referring to the story of the Civil War. Well, during the War of Independence we had the British Army had commandeered the hotels, so they were here, and then the Civil War happened and the Irish Free State Army commandeered the building, and the story of Michael Collins staying here one night with the Free State Army, and the Corcoran family who owned the business at the time sheltered De Valera in another part of the property unbeknownst to Collins on that night. And the story was told to me by a Franciscan priest who knew the parish priest here at the time, Father Burtz. And the local Republican never liked Father Burtz, they called him a right little imperialist. But anyway, he was able to relate the story of the night that Collins stayed here and that the Corcorans put up De Valera at the same time.
You've seen people from all over the world come here to find their ancestry. What's your favorite memory when you look back on your career as a hotelier and a publican? I love those terms.
Yeah.
What's your fondest memory?
Well, I have a great love of history and local history, and learning more about my own area. And we've had the greats. We've had quite a few of the Kennedy family come and stay.
Right.
And
in this hotel.
Yeah, in the hotel. Yeah, my late brother was a great friend of theirs in America. But really, at the end of it, I always say every customer is special.
Wow.
They keep me entertained and so on. But and over the years, we've had all sorts of interesting people here at the building. Jerry Adams, Charlie Haughey, all these different politicians have been here at dinners in this when it used to be a function room, and even this yard here was known as DeLay's backyard.
Yeah.
And an old friend of mine had a rhyme. She said, "You're a damn blackguard and you're a fine blackguard, and I saw you catching girls in DeLay's backyard." But we've had funny things happen here as well. I think if you don't have a sense of humour, you should be in this trade. We had a drunken policeman driving here one night, and we have a vehicular right away here, but there's a pedestrian right away out the other end, and he attempted to drive his car out the pedestrian right away. And another day I heard the cattle came running into this yard, and a cow got lodged in that alleyway out there.
Oh no.
And one of our local characters, Timmy Cotter, I'm always quoting him, he was great at telling stories, and he likened it to the Suez Canal, that there was an opening to the east and an opening to the west.
Yeah.
So we've had lots of funny things happen.
I always tell people that Creedence Hotel is like Rick's Place in the film Casablanca. People come from all over the world here. It's just so much fun, or great crack.
Great crack is right. And I often say, like over the summer, I love the idea that we established the O'Leary gathering, because I have friends that will be watching this video from the Yukon and from Australia and from Florida and all these other places. But to me, I feel it's home to them, and I feel family towards all these people that come along, and the names kind of are familiar to me, but the amount of stories I've heard from them are extraordinary. I really feel there's a book in them, their exploits.
I remember this one family was really touching. They came here and they had an old photo of the grandmother or great-grandmother to some, and they recreated the photo where she was sitting in your pub.
All right.
And the family took a modern photo to recreate that old one. I just think this is fabulous.
I think it's great. I think you get some lovely ideas. I had some people visiting some time ago, and they told me that their great-grandmother was from here, and they had a photograph of her. And I said, did you have something belonging to her? And they said, she said, I have a candlestick. And she sent us that photograph of the candlestick and of the grandmother, and we were doing a journal, a history journal, the Ballingeary History Journal, and we were able to put her on the front cover of it with the candlestick and a poem she'd made about it. So you feel, I have a great saying is that you tread softly, you tread on their dreams, and that you recognise that they come here. I feel it's like the salmon. It's only 1 or 2% of the population that make it back, but those that come get such a reward when they do come back. They kind of really reconnect, and they get the spirit of the place.
Well, I think everybody around the planet is starting to think about where they came from.
Yes.
And my family specifically is from Dunmanway, just down the road.
The Daly family, isn't it? Yeah.
But to me, the first time I came here, I felt like I was coming home, and I could feel it. And it wasn't just the place, it was the people.
The spirit of it, yes.
Yeah.
But, and I'm always ranting on about the oral tradition, and that for centuries we were an oral people, and the stories and that whole love of story and culture comes down through the generations. And though people mightn't be able to put their finger exactly on what it is that connects them, it's like that. Right. It's that spirit that's in them.
I think especially the young people, teenagers and such, at least in the U.S., they feel like they don't have roots, they don't feel grounded. But when you bring them here and say, this, were it not for the famine, this is where we would have lived.
Yes.
It just gives them a sense of some place on this planet that they're from.
They connect with,
And as you move all over the U.S. like we do, you have a place on the planet that's your anchor.
Tell us about your plans, Tom.
Okay, well, as most major projects that end up costing a lot of money begin, this started with an argument with my wife about the O'Leary family history. And I looked it up on the internet to say, oh no, that's not what happened. And what do I see but an advert for the last standing O'Leary castle for sale. And so I said, we gotta go look at it. So we came here and looked at it, and eventually we bought it. And we've been 2.5 years now, I think, in the process of getting building permits and all that sort of thing. But we're going to restore it to its pinnacle. It's 1,000 years old. It was originally a Norman structure. They then added to the height, and it's been modified for 1,000 years.
It's a tower house, isn't it?
It is now. It was redone into a tower house, but we're going to redo it into its grandest form with adding some more height that was knocked down by Cromwell. But it's going to be for weddings and different events and such. Because I feel like if I buy an artifact or something like this castle and just keep it to myself, nobody else gets to enjoy it. So it's going to be open to the community when you guys have your trad sessions.
And we have for the last 25 years been getting O'Learys back to visit for the O'Leary gathering.
Right.
And I'm sure lots of them will be listening to this interview today
with
great interest.
One of the great things we're going to do is on one wall in the vaulted ceiling room, the Great Hall, on one entire wall we're going to start with the High Kings of Ireland and come down into the O'Leary clan and down into the O'Learys of Colombia and the Philippines and the US, Canada, Australia. So when you come there, you'll be able to find your family branch out of the High Kings of Ireland, because that's what the O'Learys are. And my wife's direct descendant of Cornelius O'Leary,
the brother of Art, the famous Art O'Leary, the outlaw.
Yeah, Cornelius was the one who shot the sheriff, so he did shoot the sheriff. Ended up coming to the U.S. and we've checked with DNA, and it's been established. So that's going to be fun.